I'm going to start. I've got to get moving.
What did you say?
I went ahead and started recording because I've got to get moving. So
All right,
ready whenever you are.
Yeah, I think we can start. So we've got about 4 people online now, and there may be more than we here joining us, and 2 people. Is that, you okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Starting?
Did you do an introduction or no?
I'll do a very brief introduction, but you can give more your background. I want to thank all of you online and here for being here. The weather was a little bit threatening, so I'm glad you're joining us. Today's session is that's my phone. Sorry about that. I'll ignore it. Today's session is going to be done by Chen, who is you are a Chief Biomedical Informatics Officer, right? Chief Bioinformatics Officer, and you're an Associate Director of the Institute, of the Informatics Institute here at UAB. And Jake is going to talk about keeping biomedical data organized. And again, if any of you are online and we don't have your email address, please email me separately so I can send you the extra materials. I think that's about it. Next week we are not having a session here. It's the CCTS open house, which all of you who can make it should come to. They have all the different CCTS functions. Have you ever been to them before?
I went to
yeah.
personally.
Right. So there's, you get to see the different things that the CCTS does. Very nice food, very friendly people. So if you're in town and can come to the open house, I believe it's from 4 to 6 on next Wednesday. The Wednesday after that is we'll be back in person. So with that, Jake, you can start.
All right. Thank you very much, Ita, for organizing the series. Thank you those for coming in person and the people online. For the people online, feel free to type in your questions in your chat box. And as soon as I see them, I will pause and answer your questions. And feel free to interrupt me as well.
Yeah, you should keep, if you're going to do that, you should probably keep the chat box open or you won't see it.
Yeah, I probably would see some alert here.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
All right. So today I'm going to talk about data management issues in biomedical sciences. I do have a lot of experience in this topic, both as a user of biomedical data. For my research in bioinformatics, I use tons of data from the National Center for Biotechnology Information, from European EBI, from my collaborators. I keep them organized, otherwise I can't do my work. So as a user, I have first-hand experience. And also I'm a researcher, so I always look at better ways to keep the data organized so I can query them more efficiently. So you probably will get both perspectives on why do we need to keep the data organized as a user, and also you get a sample preview of what are the exciting things going on if you are a tool developer in my role. Let's see, how do I advance? Oh, clicker. Great. So first I'm going to talk about the trends, and then I'll give you some basic concept in data management. And then I'll just walk you through the history of a database management system to give you a perspective what technology has been around and what problem they solve and what problem they don't solve, to the point that we're now relying more and more on the late-breaking big data technologies and how they fit all together. And then the last, I will give you a case study in biological database development to give you a sense of how we put them all together to help with biological research. Let's see, I've got to figure out how to advance. Okay. So first I want to give you a sense of the scale of data. And I think if you look at your computer or thumb drive, you're very familiar with this concept of gigabytes. And for some of the other skills that you may not be very familiar with. So in fact, these terminologies, above gigabytes and terabytes, petabytes, exabytes, and zettabyte, and yottabyte, these are in increments of 10 to the third power. And also, I want to give you a sense of the scale. If you create a Word document with 2 or 3 lines, and that's 1 kilobytes of information, that's not much. I remember for the first computer I got, and that was back in the 1990s, and I only got a meager 1 megabytes of memory, just enough to play computer games. And 1 gigabytes of information is about 1.5 CDs size. So you got about 20 sounds. When you get to 1 terabyte, and that's becoming interesting because nowadays if you go to stores and the smallest hard drive is about 1 terabyte, but it can only fit 2 or 3 whole genome sequenced human genome. When you get to the 1 petabyte size, you think it's an awful lot of storage, but that's only 2 days of data that Facebook just collects. When you get to 1 exabyte of information, you think that's more than any human can produce, but actually when you look at the amount of information that DNA can encode, in 2 milligrams of DNA, we can actually, if we have a way to write to the DNA, then we can store 1 exabyte of information. And 1 zettabyte is just prior to the year 2000, the world's total one-way communication capacity is at 1 zettabyte. That's everything talking to everything else, and that's our capacity. And in fact, put it into a perspective, at UAB today, if you go to our high-performance computing facility and look at the GPFS online storage, it will tell you that we have about 7 petabytes worth of information, or about the 2 weeks of the data that Facebook can generate. And that's all that we can store at UAB today. But the world's total information created daily is about 2.5 zettabyte. So there are lots of information, and fortunately or unfortunately, we only capture a very tiny percent of that for our everyday commercial or research activities. So that gives you some perspective on the size of the data, but the size of the data is only one aspect of the big data. So we hear the terminology big data a lot, and there are 4 V's associated with the big data. One of the V's is the volume, right? That can give you a sense of terabytes or petabytes or exabytes of information. We all know that internet are generating lots of data, and biology, especially fueled by the whole genome sequencing, is getting lots of data. And we also have, in the medical school or healthcare setting, we have pathology images, and radiology department generate lots of images, and those creates lots of data volumes. And velocity is also coming. I saw statistics. If you fly a Boeing 737, and if you were to record all of the data as the flight takes off from Boston all the way to San Francisco, the entire flight would generate enough data that is 230 terabytes in size. And so you can see the data are coming in real time and very, very fast. So in traditional healthcare setting, we don't generate data that fast, but with the future of sensors and a smartphone or sensors that you embed in patients' home or healthcare facilities, you can see the data are also increasing in velocity. Variety, I'll talk about it, and essentially it's the different types of data. DNA, genomics data, proteomics data, metabolomics data, microbiome data, clinical data, imaging data, survey data. They're all coming in different shape and form. Veracity is also a major problem. We can say, well, there are so many data, but are all the data just correct? Right? So you can imagine if you measure the genome sequencing data, but however, if your sequence, the DNA samples contain contaminations, and then you're not going to get the correct sequencing information. You're just going to get a lot of noises or garbages. So veracity is a real problem as you're accumulating lots of volumes of these data. And also the values of the data are very important. If you have a video feed of that nice picture over there for 3 months, you're not going to get a lot of value because all you have is just large amount of information that is repetitive in nature. Right? So you want to think about all these 5 Bs. So in the modern days, as a data scientist, I didn't intentionally put the same glasses in there, but traditionally what is known as a nerd is now probably a well-paid data scientist, right? So to be a data scientist is a lot more than keeping the data organized, but keeping the data organized is a foundational skills, right? So data scientists should know math and the statistics, programming, and databases, right? So keeping the data organized is a major skill of the data science. And data science also is not just a computer geek. He has to have some knowledge about the domain. In our case, it's about medical research, translational medicine, or healthcare. And he also needs to be able to communicate and visualize this information and make it be consumed by the decision makers, like physicians or PIs of a research grant. So I think that we say, well, we are just a traditional biologist, and we're very happy with the Excel spreadsheet, and I love spreadsheet, and there's nothing wrong with it. But you need to think again, right? So data are coming. If you're ignoring it, you're going to be just swiped out and fall behind. So I think if people are already talking that biology has become a data science, essentially the traditional way of using one gene, one protein, one model system, doing hypothesis-driven approach is increasingly augmented by this bulk approach where you measure everything in large scale and then you look for evidences again and again for multiple stories. So essentially this is the omics versus the regular genetics. Okay? So what are the evidences? And there are lots of evidences. Shown here are 2 growth curves. One is the number of data in the gen bank, and it's always been exponentially growing, doubling every 6 to 8 months, faster than the growth of our computer powers, which doubles, according to Moore's law, which doubles every 18 months. So there are lots of the data that are being simply accumulated and they're not being interpreted because our ability to interpret them fall behind. And there are also lots of articles, and you can argue that in recent several decades, the number of articles with the open publications, models, and the internet, and there are lots of things are being published as well. If you look at the databases being curated, starting just 20 years ago, there were only about 200 published biological databases. but nowadays the published biological databases increase in more than order of magnitude. So there are different type of data, and the complexity of these data also are just characterize this biology data away from the data that you see in the general domain. For example, the data is very broad. Even though we say it's a biology data, but in biology there are different sub-disciplines. In cell biology, we look at completely different data, maybe single-cell genomics data, than in genetics and structural biology, where they focus on protein structures or sequence mutations. And in pharmacology, we also look at the drug perturbation data, gene expression signatures of organisms. So it's very broad. And you can also say that in biology, there's a unique needs, and that's very specific. When we capture each type of data, our focus are different. When we capture the human sequencing data, the genome sequencing data, our needs are to understand the variations. When we capture microarray data or RNA-seq data, our needs are to understand the dynamics, the changes over time or conditions. So the needs are very different. Unlike in the general purpose domain, when you have a clickstream on the web applications, and their needs are relatively simple. They want to understand you so that they can sell you more stuff. Right? Here it's very, very specific, unique, depending on the different data type. And also I would say that the data are driven by biological experiment. Right? If we have a certain experimental platform, nowadays what's popular is called a second generation or third generation sequencing platform, then that will dominate our ability to consume these data. And there are many data types I already mentioned. So here I have a slide that comprehensively lists the type of biomolecular data that commonly people use, share, and collect among the community. There are specific individual sequences, structures, or domains. There are genomic databases. There are functional genomic databases. There are databases about the molecular interactions, pathways. There are databases about immunology, pathological images, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very diverse. Then that comes to the question, why do we need to do the biomedical data management? Why can't we just leave the data as they were generated on the machines? Well, I think that these are the argument, right? First is the data generated in biology are the raw building materials. Think about the minerals in the original site. They're not going to be useful unless you harvest them and then blend them through a manufacturing process and then make them metals or industrial products. But likewise, the data themselves in biology, even though they're valuable measurements, they don't speak for themselves. You need to bring them into the biology lab, into the domain knowledge context so that you can interpret them. You want to actually put them all together. So processing and storing them in different format really require us to manage them properly, right? So you want to, part of this management is to organize the data, but part of it is also to query this information and restructure it, or in the term to model it, so that you can do some predictions. And what does this data tell you about the trend in biology? And then also there's a need to share information. each one of us are only doing one specific part in the entire biological knowledge discovery area. And we need to share information, share data, and that sharing process requires a robust system to achieve that. Well, if it were easy, I wouldn't be standing here to talk about the data management. There are lots of issues, and I would say that are quite challenging to handle. And so I'm listing some of the issues here, and I'll elaborate on some of the issues. But essentially, we got way too many data types, way too many databases, and there's no consistent format. Why isn't there a consistent format? Because biology is just traditionally governed by grassroots biologists who come up with the data measurements, publish paper, and they go out, move forward, and maybe they're going to be known for their Nobel Prize winning work, but not going to be winning a Nobel Prize for managing the data, right? So I think naturally the system reward people who are there first, who do it once, maybe in a very particular way, unlike in the general e-commerce industry where people are going to be rewarded for repeated behavior. Right? Imagine if Amazon can only sell a product to you once, and then if you want to buy it a second time, they don't remember about you. They do a very lousy job identifying them. They're not going to be in business. But this is what's happening in biology. So we have to deal with people fighting each other and about the semantics of the data because it's evolving and don't agree with the data formats and barely come together, maybe lagging years behind in the ontology, in the data structure. And then let's be honest, the people who are trained in biology are not good engineers, and the good engineers don't usually have a strong interest in biology. So the software that were created in this field and always are somehow lagging behind and subpar compared to what's in the e-commerce field. So that's the challenge. And so we need to improve. And one way to do that is through some learning and understanding importance, whether you're going to do it yourself or you hire people, and hopefully those basic concepts will help you. One of the basic concepts is the data structure. The data are actually in the three categories of structures. And the traditional paradigm is to move the data from unstructured to semi-structured to structured format. What is unstructured form data? Essentially, that's the data that's generated as is. It doesn't have a lot of structures. It doesn't have tags or schemas. For example, this lecture is tape recorded today. Whatever has been recorded, and that's a unstructured data. You can't really say for this frame number 2001, and what's the information of my slides. And you can't query that unless you put it into some kind of a structure. For semi-structured data, usually we refer information that are somewhat tagged. For example, they will say, for this section, you're supposed to put in a heading. For this section, you're supposed to embed a video. But how you embed it, it's really the semantic issue, but it doesn't take care of the semantic as well as the structured data format. But in structured data format, it's data plus a well-defined schema. Let's look at some examples. Right? So unstructured data example, physician's notes, for example, what I've shown in here. You can have clinical history, finding, comparisons, impression. Lots of the word effusion show up here, but in different contexts. And whoever is trained and will write this in a free format. There may have some indications of structure, but really they're not structure. They're just highlighted, just a section headings. Okay, or the pathology images, or even the publication that we have. They're not structured. Okay, for semi-structured data, usually we talk about things that have some syntax using a tag. The GenBank is the world's first biological database that captures all the sequences that has ever been known to human. It's managed by NCBI institution within the NIH. The ASN.1 format is an example of semi-structured data. For example, here, I know it's very difficult to read here. It would say locus, essentially the gene, and they will list the gene name, length of the gene, and type of this sequence is DNA. The date, it will give the definition, accession, version, some PubMed references of a certain number, and then it talk about the features within this gene, what are the coding regions, and so on. So this has some structure, but within that field, you can put in a free text. There's not a lot of restrictions on that. When you look at the fully structured data, the tabular data format, it's completely different. Right? Here I will call this data has a schema because it has the first row as a schema. It would say these are the clinical variables, and these are the gene name indicating the gene's expression. So if you go to any position in the cell, you can read out, oh, this is about the depth of invasion, and the expression of that gene is 0.319. So all of the numbers have very, very clearly well-defined meanings, and the format, the structure is very, very regular. This is what we call the structured data. And the key to having the data in structure is to develop a schema. The schema describes how the data should be organized, what are the semantics, what are the allowable data domains, data types, what are the constraints that you can put in here. Right? So we talk about the three different types of structure. We need a database because essentially we want to keep the data structured, right? If we can keep the things structured, and then we hypothetically we can make querying them easier. So one of the reasons for using a database is to keep the data when the analysis is done, so it's permanent. If you forget about it, and if you ask the database what happened to the depth of invasion and the gene expression number I recorded, and you can fire up a query and it will always retrieve that. It can also remember additional attribute details. For example, you say, well, I not only want to record this, but I also want to record 10 different samples that allow me to come to this average expression result. And for that 10 different samples, I actually collect 2 of them from one type of patient, 8 of them from another type of patient. Well, if you have a database, you can keep all of that additional attributes organized and link them together, right? And also you say, well, I want to look at this, and meanwhile, I want the whole community of users to also look at it without crashing into each other. Sometimes I might write into it, sometimes somebody else may be reading it, and then that the multi-user environment is very important. Another justification is that you want to support flexible user reports of the data. Because sometimes you may want to look at expression value, sometimes you may want to look at the average expression across a number of genes for particular conditions and generate a different table as a report. So whenever you want to do that, if you store the data in a structured format, and database will allow you to generate these reports with just the initial investment of organizing the data. If you also want to distribute your data, you put your database on top, just behind the web applications or smartphone applications, and those applications will query the data, and that really allows you to distribute your data in any application environment, right? So there's another special concept that you need to understand. It's called a DBMS, Database Management Software System. What it is it's just a software that essentially can be treated as a data janitor, right? Keeping the data organized is very painful. It's just like sweeping your floor. It's very painful. Collecting the garbage is very painful. But we have specialized people, the janitor that take care of that. The software DBMS take care of all of that for you. For example, it will try to document the structure of your schema in a metadata repository. Every time you define, well, my table contains first name, last name, social security number, ethnicity of a specific individual, then as long as you define it, that data metadata is remembered by the DBMS. It will be retrieved when you want it to. So that's something that is nice. Also, it will allow you to efficiently manage these data. To you, maybe storing 10 lines of data is the same as storing 10 billion lines of data. But to the software or to anybody who is actually doing the work, you see that's completely different. Because just trying to search for a particular username from 10 lines of data, you can go through the first line, second line. Within 10 milliseconds, you can find your answer. But if you have 10 billion rows and spending 10 billion milliseconds, and that's centuries of time work, right? So you really need the database management software system to interface with the hardware and talk to the hardware and do all kinds of tricks to really scale it up. And those things requires lots of engineers' time, and luckily those are handled by the DBMS. And controlling views and the backup recovery and all of these chores are taken care of by these software systems. So they're very useful, right? And then we come to the idea of the concept of database applications. Database applications is use of database created and the use of database management system and the use of GUI, graphical user interface, all together to create an application that human can interact with. And the application can do so many different things. I won't go through the details. But there are lots of challenges in using database applications in the biomedical domain. For example, there's the issue of autonomous versus heterogeneous applications. I mentioned that there are 3,000 databases in life sciences that's been published today. And for any database applications, in order to find similar data sources, that's already very challenging. they all speak different languages. You have to understand what DBMS is using, whether it support a standard application programming interface and the syntax so that you can talk to each other. And so the real-world application requires the use of many databases, and that turned out to be very challenging. What happens in the internet world is that people get together, the big companies get together and say, well, these are the ways that we should pass the information. For example, if you have a product, then they say you have to fit your product according to this XML format. Otherwise, you won't be able to sell it on Amazon. They already negotiated those up front, but in biology, we don't have that. And so we have the inconsistent format issue as well. And then sometimes inconsistent semantics, even for a simple thing like a gene. In the old days, and we think that the gene is protein coding genes, and therefore the numbers are less, around the 20,000, 21,000 for humans. But nowadays we have the RNA genes, and we sometimes we have these pseudogenes, and different databases may use this concept differently. So you get different number. When you're only interested in one or two, those problems don't jump up. But when you're dealing with all of these issues at the genome level, those applications, you have to consider all of the semantic inconsistencies. And the content also evolve over time. If you go to the database of gene mutations called a COSMIC database, they keep updating the mutations because there are projects from all over the world. They're reporting new mutations for cancer. And the content evolve. So if you look at one gene, the frequency of mutations on a specific site may change after you publish. And how do you actually make use of that applications if you want to introduce clinical genomic sequencing and try to tell your patients, oh, here's the statistics. 99.9, you're likely to have a disease, but then all of a sudden, if the research change, the interpretation may change. That brings up a lot of issues. And so lots of these issues are going to be partially resolved by the DBMS technologies. And so we'll talk about them. So the technology really is not that old, considering the computers is only about just 70, 80 years old in history. So starting in the 1960s, we started coming up with a way to come up with a data structure called a schema. And some of the easy schema to conceive is a hierarchical and network models. So what is a hierarchical model? It's like a tree. Now think about your computer, and in your Windows or Mac computer, you have folders. A hierarchical model is almost like folder and subfolder structure. You have organization. You say within the organization, I have departments. Within departments, I may have program. Within program, I may have different course offering. So this is a hierarchical model of the structure of course offering within a university setting. Right? You can use this hierarchical model to define biomedical ontology, to say starting from just a phylum and then all the way down to a species, and you can use that. So it's a tree-like structure. But the problem with this hierarchical model is you cannot have multiple classifications. Right? So there's lots of restrictions. In the end, we all know that if in order to make it convenient for us to organize files in our computer, sometimes we duplicate them. Sometimes we still keep the data cluttered. although the computer is supposed to help us. So that's really not an efficient way of managing information. Then it comes to the network model. So different from the hierarchical model, which always have a single parent when you traverse back. Network model doesn't have a parent start or end. It always have multiple parent and it can have multiple children. And this is a data structure that is called RDF. It now has been revived to describe semantic information on the internet. How do you read it? And you can say at the root, and someone has friends, and this person has a name of Jack, and turned out the address is a doghouse, and the street name is 435 Hoffman. And this person's name is Lumpy, this person's name is Allison, that has a home that's next to 435, it's 437 Hoffman. So by storing information this way in a network structure, and you can actually be very, very flexible. But the problem with this is you almost cannot store the schema in here. It doesn't have a schema because you can see data. The data is distributed in the network. It's almost like how the brain works and how the internet works. But when you try to say, what is the pattern? If you have address, if you want to store billions of addresses, it can't do it. It's highly distributed, and it's not very well organized either. So starting in the 1970s and for 2 decades, the relational database and its extension has come into being. And it's really popularized by Oracle and the IBM DB2 and in some extent the open source MySQL and Postgres movement. And what relational database is able to accomplish is to keep the schema separate from the data themselves. When you look at a schema like this essentially you can conceive this as a first line header in an Excel spreadsheet. Okay? So it is a spreadsheet. You can imagine this is a spreadsheet that is called products, with the column header, product ID, product type, supplier, product name, and so on. And then when you move to a different entity, you get to see a different structure. That structure is called a schema, right? And then this is customer orders, and then there's a well-defined way to for you to note how the different entities need to have a relationship, whether each product can be shown in multiple orders or not. And you use these notations to just capture the schema and relationship of schemas. And the advantage of doing that is that you can pretty much focusing on one schema or one entity and populate millions or billions of records all in the same format. And it really overcomes lots of the problems associated with the network model. It's too flexible, but here it's very rigid. And so if you're interested, you can actually take a look at the code. The database usually is called the Relational DBMS system, has a very declarative way of specifying queries against a relational database. This query says, return me the ISBN title, price, and price percentage 6% as a sales tax information from this table called a book, where the book's price is greater than $100, but then in the end ordered by title. This is so understandable, and this is the beauty of SQL. It allows the user to specify what you want into a format that the human can learn, but it's not really the human language. It's a language that computer can translate into efficient underlying Java or C code and execute. And it also has schema, have syntax for specifying how to define a table, how to insert records and update and doing transactions, all of that. You don't have to understand the details, but what I'm showing you here is essentially an example of DBMS applications and how much convenience it can bring that alleviate our data management pain. And then it turned out that the people want to do more fancy stuff, and they also come up with an object model. It's a different way of doing it that can be more readily mapped to the programming language, and we won't talk about it in detail. But starting in the 1990s, the problem has shifted. Up until the pre-1990s, we can manage millions of records within each company. Then they're pretty much okay. But then there comes the conglomerate like Walmart. And they're everywhere, they're in every country, and they're essentially capturing tens of thousands of store sales information. And their problem is, how do we predict at what time do we ship what product to the region so that they can make the most profit? Walmart is known for having the best logistics. They can actually purchase stuff, make them in bulk in China, and then they can actually bring them over here and then distribute to the store that want them. And the whole process is efficient, but still, from the time that they make the product to the time that they can sell it, it may take 1 or 2 months. And so they really need to actually predict ahead of the time what are the potential sales performance and the demand of product. And one of the examples is that that Walmart has to build a data warehouse, a very complex multi-geographical aggregated database to predict seasonal sales information, right? And they made a prediction prior to hurricane seasons in stores in the south that, of course, you need those torchlight and that you need those emergency life-saving products. And they also found that during hurricane seasons, people tend to like strawberry lollipops, popsicles. And we don't know why, but there is a hypothesis. Maybe people say, well, I have nothing else to do, and then I like something sweet to kill time inside. But they actually, based on those findings, then they were able to stock them and make a lot of profit. So data warehouse and applications really allows people to aggregate tremendous amount of data from different areas and still make predictions, predictive analytics. And some of the schema will change according to the needs of the applications. This is called a star schema. Essentially, in the very center is the sales items, and you can actually have different dimensions at each arm of the star: product dimension, customer dimension, location dimension, and time dimension. By doing it this way, you can pretty much tie it to very efficient type of query called the online analytical processing queries. So we won't go through the detail, but essentially I want to leave you an impression that the data warehouse was a very important technology in the 1990s. This is an example in biomedical applications. It's called the Cancer Genome Atlas. In Cancer Genome Atlas, you can think of it as a data warehouse of all of the cancer genes mutations, expression information, according to different cancer types, according to availability, according to the data types, copy number variations, single nucleotide morphism, expressions, chromosomal rearrangement, and so on and so forth. So it's really an application with an underlying cancer genomic data warehouse behind it. Today it has grown so big with raw data, the NIH has to host the entire application on the Amazon cloud environment. And I heard that the total data is about 2 petabytes. Okay, so 2,000 terabytes in size. So starting from the 2000, and there's a new trend. The new trend is that even the relational database and data warehouse have hit the brick wall. Right? So think about it, a really successful data warehouse, only a company as big as Walmart or Goldman Sachs can afford the multiple tens of millions of dollars that is used to bring these information together. How can the average biologist invest in such a tremendous efforts of putting things into schema, cleaning things from the beginning to the end, and putting them into the structure? In many cases, people think, well, maybe we don't need it, especially for the case of Google, Facebook. They're saying, well, let's wait a second, look at the majority type of the data that we have. In Google, the majority type of data is a search data and the web pages that they have to cache. And they say, wait a minute, most of the web pages are not changing. Maybe only a few percentage of web pages are changing over a course of months. And for the queries such as Donald Trump or Obamacare, those terms are going to be searched again and again and again. And there are some terms that probably will be very rarely retrieved. Lots of information are write-only. So why don't we distribute this information and so that we have tens of thousands of computers and each computer can only hold a snapshot of fragments of the internet, and then we allow the computers to actually come to different, the queries to come to different computers with redundant information, and then aggregate the information to give you the very good response. Right? So that's what they did, and then they come up with essentially going back to NoSQL data management system again. They specialize on the Hadoop structure. I'll talk about it a little later. And then when they do have the SQL, it's a SQL-like language that allows them to query information that is almost unstructured, or you can say semi-structured, in a distributed system with the expectation that you can come up with a query result within very, very short time frame. In fact, Hadoop is so popular, if you search out online Twitter biography of people who claim that they have big data expertise, Hadoop is the largest node. So why do we need Hadoop? Imagine that you have social networking applications and you need to process multiple petabytes of data sets. I already mentioned that the Facebook would generate 1 petabyte of data every 2 days. And the data may not have strict schema. These are all chat messages or images that people uploaded. And it's very expensive to build the structure when you're reading this, writing this information. So people say, let's build a very specialized application. But if you have tens of thousands of computers, you know for sure some of the computer will fail because of hardware issue. Do you actually buy computers that's 10 times or 100 times more expensive. No, we can't afford it. So we allow certain nodes to fail, so you have to have the built-in redundancies. And that redundancy has to be distributed, it has to be very large, and sometimes they run heterogeneous operating systems. So Hadoop is really a technical way of helping the data management to achieve all of these. Very high write throughput so that you can not be bottlenecked by these information write. And it's a very cheap elastic storage that can expand or shrink depending on your application needs. And the querying will have very low latency. And you can always get some result within a reasonable time frame, regardless of the size of your applications. And high consistency and this efficiency. So essentially, it's a parallel processing cluster that really help you to manage the data that's different from the Oracle's relational database approach. And sitting underneath it is a very simple two-phase concept that's called a MapReduce. So without going through the complex details of the MapReduce algorithm, essentially the map phase says, I have my information, let's say all the PubMed literature distributed around with some redundancy on 1,000 computers. Okay, each computer will hold a chunk of the PubMed with perhaps 100,000 articles. And in the mapping phase, essentially I am trying to figure out of that 100,000 articles, for each word that I care about, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, pathology, and so on, I'll simply build an index and a count how many times they appear in this collection of articles. Okay? So mapping is essentially doing that aggregation and counting within this machine one. And that's so each machine will actually independently perform that. Let's say you count in machine 1, 2, 3, you have 3 machines, Parkinson's occurs 3 times in this collection, 3 times in this collection, 4 times in this collection. And then they don't know each other. But in the reduced phase, essentially you look at all of the non-redundant machines that have these separately calculated information. You try to actually group them together and then generate the final answer. And that is a reduction of the aggregated information calculated from distributed system. Then for the example I just gave you, so you would just add 3 plus 3 plus 4, that's 10, and then give the answer. So this map and reduce, even though it's not conceptually very efficient, but it's very easy and it can be mapped to many type of problems on simple computer hardware with redundancy control. So that's the idea. So of course, and nowadays, and you may also heard of the term called a data lake. And the data lake is a technology that will actually use software system that allows relational databases and the Hadoop system that is specialized for big data to work seamlessly together. Right? In Apache Spark, for example, and that's an implementation. You can query different type of sources, and essentially this really is fitting for biomedical or healthcare application situations. You may have ongoing transactional information from healthcare system that is very, very unstructured, and you never have the time to put them into a schema. You may have biological databases captured in some relational database, such as the gene mutational information, you may have unstructured data on Hadoop system that contains all of the whole genome sequencing result. If you use a data lake technology, you can query for this person with this history of fatty acid, fatty liver syndrome, and then have the sequencing done, and then having these set of mutations, and then what are the correlations that you can find that's different from people with type 2 diabetes. So we don't have that application now, but I think one of the interesting research problems that we're embarking is to really tap into these different data sources that allow us to answer questions that were not even thinkable a few years back. Right. What time is it right now?
4:16.
Okay, so I think I'll go through the case study very quickly and then conclude today's lecture. So Cosmic is an example of traditional database application in biological domain. Cosmic stands for Catalog of Somatic Mutations in Cancer. It's been constantly updated. Right now it's been on the 80s editions already. And it has all kinds of tools in addition to the underlying data to help with the cancer genomic analysis. It's a very useful resource and the portal on the internet. Right? If you look at the data, the history, it started in 2010, actually with only 4 genes. And up until 3 years ago, it's got almost half of the human genes covered, and today it's got even a lot more. When you look at the information captured in the Cosmic database, it captures genes, samples, mutations, papers that describe the functional aspects of the mutations, variants, gene fusion events, genomic rearrangement, whole genome. So Cosmic database has lots of information, but it accomplished that by carefully curating information all together under one schema. So certainly this is not an example of big data Hadoop application, but they may have Hadoop underneath the pipeline when they generate the result. So as I said, this is an online database of curated somatically acquired mutation found in cancer. And when it's first launched, it has just a few of them. The current catalog contains full and up-to-date curation of mutation data. And the mutation can be point mutation, can be novel gene fusions, can be all of the somatic mutation data from candidate genes. When you look at the source of this database, part of it comes from the literature manual curation. It always tries to keep a database called the Cancer Gene Consensus census. And that census requires at least 2 major literature review that says this particular gene has cancer implications, either as tumor suppressor gene or oncogene. And then they will try to put it into the database. And then once it's in the database, when you have cancer genomic studies such as the TCGA, and then they will try to clean up the data from TCGA and figure out which of them are somatic mutations by filtering out the germline mutations, and then they'll put it into this database. So curation is a major part of the database content development. And it's got automated curation effort and semi-automated and manual curation effort. All of the literature curations are manual, just essentially reading all the PubMed articles and put the gene record in here. But the semi-automatic curations are coming from these TCGA, ICGC, and all of these international cancer genome sequencing consortium. And then they build software pipeline to remove redundancy, calculate statistics, and making it more consistent into the database. So as you can see through this particular example, the biological database development is mostly about curation, right? Making sure that the veracity of the data is correct. And also it tried to use common schema and try to define the syntax and the semantics of the schema such that these can be comprehended by a human researcher, a biologist, or when they get major funding and continual funding, NIH would require them to develop a community standard for sharing. And so I think in biology you will see this as a very typical. Whoever has the initial ideas and the funding will tend to make the standards for the community, and the community tend to evolve around those major data sources. And if you're interested, you can actually take a look at that. So that really concludes today's lecture. In summary, I think that what I talked about today is that the trend is there. If you choose to ignore the data, you are not going to be a qualified biologist in today's setting. If you choose to embrace data, the key is to find the right architecture to manage your data. We talk about big data, but big data is usually mapped to Hadoop and the Hadoop file system or NewSQL type of software system that usually implies a certain scale. If your application doesn't have that scale of volumes and complexity yet, relational database is usually the default. But in order to build a very good relational database applications, you look at how Cosmic actually implemented. It's not a trivial effort. You need to dedicate people to understand the engineering aspect, to understand the biology aspect, and nothing is fully automatic. So with that, and I'll see if you have any questions before we conclude today. Well, people online, feel free to type your questions.
Or they can ask you directly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you have a...
They unmute themselves and they can ask directly.
Hello, Dr. Chen.
Hi.
Hi. Can you tell me who has access to Cosmic?
Everyone would have the access to it. It's freely available on the internet as an online portal. So you can just Google the term and that's the first that come up.
Okay.
Anyone from the local audience? Or do you feel like you might use data management in your work? That's a question. What's your name?
Juliet.
Yeah.
I use it currently for regulatory type work, not for the biology side and relationship databases.
Okay.
Well, I guess if there are no more questions. Did we get you to sign in? Did you sign in out there? Please do, because we send you things afterwards.
Okay.
Right here.
Thank you.
Well, if you are shy of asking questions and want to ask it, my email is jakechen@uab.edu. It's very straightforward. Thank you all.
Okay, and thank you everybody. And again, if there are people on there, I can't see the list, but if people are listening in who didn't give us their email, please send the email eburner@uab.edu. Again, next week we won't be having one CCTS open house for those of you who are in town. And the following week, August 9th, will be the next live session. Thank you all. Yeah, this is where I always have to find the thing.